The boys in homeroom were talking about it. They were like the Hardy Boys, but there were 3 of them. They were always talking about some adventure they just had. They had even invited me a few times, but I was always too chicken. One time, they jumped the fence at the quarry. Another time, they went to the old abandoned mall near the sealed-off freeway that no one used anymore. This time, they were talking about a cave. It wasn't far from my house, at least that's what Miles said. It was in the woods behind my backyard, about a half-mile down. But it wasn't the cave they were talking about. Well, it was and it wasn't. See, Miles said he had heard something there, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. He said a voice was calling him to go inside. The others thought maybe they heard something, but they couldn't be sure. Miles wanted to go in, but the others said no, and as much as they wanted to, they just hadn't come prepared. Mickey said that it looks like you'd easily get lost because it was so dark. But tonight they'd bring flashlights and one of the big, long dock line ropes Chris's dad had down at the boatyard. It was sturdy, and if they tied it to something outside the cave, it'd keep them from getting lost in there. They invited me. When I said yes, they all froze. "You're going in first, then," Mickey said. That dumb, freckled smile and greaser hair always made me want to punch him. We all met up that night by my house around midnight. I followed them as they walked single file straight through the woods. It was easy enough to find the cave, half-mile down, just like Miles said. It looked like a big open mouth, black inside and totally hollow. "There's someone in there," Miles told me. I stared at it with the others expecting me to go in first. He said he wasn't trying to scare me, but he knew it was true. There was something in there. He had heard it himself. I nearly peed my pants just looking at it. I told them I couldn't do it. They laughed. Then Mickey tied the rope to a tree outside and told me to wait for them. He said if they hadn't come back in an hour, I should tell someone. So I sat there and guarded the rope. At first it went taut because they used it to help them go down the initial slope just past the mouth of the cave. Just after a minute or so, the rope went slack, and they called to me saying that they were going a bit deeper. I said okay, and I sat there in the woods. That was the scariest night of my life. Normally, the woods would be the scariest part. I didn't even like looking at them from my bedroom window at night. Something about them always felt sinister, even during the day, to be honest. They never felt like nature usually does, but this time it wasn't the towering trees or the whispering of the wind slithering through the leaves that terrified me. This time it was the cave. From where I sat, it was just a wide opening with darkness so thick it could even be a curtain. Someone could have been standing there staring at me, and I would have never known it. The sun woke me up. It was dawn. It had been 5 hours since they went into the cave. I moved to the entryway and screamed, but there was no answer. I told my mom everything, and she called the police. The policemen could hardly fit in the tunnels past the slope. They tried everything they could, but nothing worked. 2 weeks later, the search was called off. I had nightmares pretty much every night for a year after that. On days I couldn't sleep, I would sit up, looking at the woods behind my house, waiting for them to come walking out. They never did, of course. I never heard a single thing about them. Some people even tried going into the caves to look for anything they could find, but they all said it was just too tight to get anywhere after the slope near the opening. My senior year, people were finally starting to forget. It was almost like it was an urban legend, like it hadn't really happened. I was okay with that. I wanted to forget. One night, I woke up to a knocking at my front door. It was still the middle of the night. I was so groggy, I wasn't sure I was even really awake or not. I followed the sound of the knocking all the way downstairs and opened the door. But there was no one there. Then I heard the knocking again and realized it had been coming from behind me, from the basement door. Now I was sure I was awake. And I was scared. Every few seconds, it would come again. Knock, knock, knock. I was scared to open it, but I was frozen there, too afraid to run. So I opened the door. Miles was walking down the stairs already. The light in the basement was off, so he was just barely visible. He turned back and looked at me. "You have to come to the cave," he said. "We're still down there." He turned to go back down. Just before he did, his eyes glistened yellow in the half-light. He walked into the dark and vanished. I tried to convince myself that it had been a dream, but something inside wouldn't let me believe it. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it was true? What if they were still down there? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mouth of the cave, just like that night. I felt like all it wanted was for me to go inside. I kept thinking about the tunnels. What if there was one right beneath me as I saw in class? What if all three boys were only a few feet away from me, right beneath the surface? It would have been the easiest thing, just staying put, keeping to the surface. The risk was all below. Just knowing it was there, knowing I would never have an answer to what happened to those guys unless I went in. I found myself going in there one day, when it was still light out, with nothing but a flashlight in hand. I figured I'd just cross the threshold, look around for a second, and come back up. Maybe the pulling, the incessant thinking about it would finally stop if I just went inside, just for a second. When I got there, it wasn't so scary, so I walked inside. The cave was wide, wider than I would have thought. It sloped down so that just after you had gone in, you were already too deep to see the opening behind you unless you looked up, which I did. The cave stretched on beneath me. It was steep, but not so much that it caused much concern. I figured if I was really desperate, I could climb back up pretty easily. So I slid down, following the beam of my light, down and down the wide open cave. Finally, I came to the edge of the slope. There was a drop, only about 7 feet down. I aimed my light. It seemed like a flat platform and a way to keep going straight. I could only see a foot or two into the corridor. The walls were full of rocks that stuck out. I could climb up if I wanted, so I sat on the ledge and pushed myself off, landing on the platform. "Hello?" I called at the edge of the corridor. My voice carried, bouncing off the walls and fading into the dark. The feeling that had brought me here didn't dissipate as I moved deeper into the cave. It was just the opposite. The feeling got more and more intense, like I was always right on the edge of finding out the mysteries of the cave. So I went into the corridor. It wasn't super wide, but not too narrow either. I had to turn to walk sideways and fit comfortably, but that was okay. Behind me, the light from outside was starting to fade. In front, there was only the yellow beam of my flashlight bounding against the rock, which got sharper and sharper as I walked on. By the time I reached the end of the corridor, they were sharp as knives. There was another slight slope down. Beyond that, I wasn't sure. My light couldn't reach. I slid down, but the slope was so smooth I almost slipped and fell. At the bottom, I turned my light back and saw the slope was just as big as the first one. Only it was steeper, and there was nothing to hold on to. I tried climbing back up, but even as I did, I knew there was no turning back. And as much as I wanted to leave, I still felt like it wasn't done. Just a little further, I thought. I was almost there. The tunnel ahead wasn't wide like the first. In fact, it was exactly as wide as I was. I pushed in, both my arms grazing the sides. Each step was tighter than the last, and worse yet, it was always going down. I realized that ever since I had entered the cave, I had been steadily moving deeper underground, always going down. I must have gone at least a quarter of a mile below the surface by now. There was no turning back. I just had to hope I would find something that the other boys didn't. The beam of my flashlight grew dim, but there wasn't much to see anyway because it got so thin ahead. The ceiling of the cave wall dipped down and my only option became simply to go with it, until it got so thin that I was on my stomach. There wasn't enough room to pull myself forward by my arms, so I had to belly crawl 1 inch at a time. My right arm was fully extended out in front of me, the flashlight shaking as I moved. And still the ground sloped down, always deeper. Every moment that passed, I was farther from the surface. I thought the cave would have some logic to its passages, but I was wrong. There was no rhyme or reason for why the tunnels would turn right, or the ground would suddenly give way. And yet, no matter how narrow or awkward, there was always enough room for me to pass through, like it had been made for human bodies to inhabit it, made by something beyond comprehension. And then, just as my light was beginning to truly die out, the narrow passageway I had to push and struggle through, ripping my clothes and tearing my skin, finally opened up. I was elated. My lungs could fill again without the pain of jagged rocks scraping my ribs. But the feeling didn't last. There was nothing ahead. No passage. But there was something below. Water. Black. Nearly invisible. I stepped in it, thinking it was a puddle. My foot sank down to my shins before I caught myself on the edge. First, I tried to go back the way I came, but the protruding rocks cut into my stomach. They all faced toward me so that when I was moving toward them, they only scraped my skin, but now, if I moved the other way, they would rip into me. There was no going back. I could stand here in the little pocket and die, or I could drop into that black hole in the ground and risk not only being stuck, but drowning at the same time. The water bubbled, and I wondered if there was something beneath the surface. Something that had called me here. Called Miles here all that time ago. But then another thought struck me. This one, so horrible, I wished I could have taken it back as soon as I had it. The mouth of the cave. The long, twisting tunnels. The warmth of it against my skin. It all felt so alive. What if it was? What if Miles hadn't been called by something in the cave, but by the cave itself? What if the water moves because it was still digesting their bones? My light finally went out, and I was left with nothing but a darkness so absolute, it too felt alive. Like there was someone standing so close to me. I couldn't see anything at all. Yellow eyes stared up from the black pool beneath me. They quickly sank into the depths. I stood there, frozen and trembling, my mind reeling. Had I really seen them? I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe an hour, maybe 5. My joints were locking up and the silence around me began to sound like voices. I would move and my feet would scrape the ground and I would realize just how quiet it had really been. The dread of my situation began to set in and I made my decision. I would dive into the black pool. There was no other way. I closed my eyes, which had already filled with tears, and I took a deep breath. I jumped inside. As soon as I did, I knew there was no coming back up the same way. The tunnel was about 5 feet deep. Below, the space opened up into a vast black ocean. I hoped to reach the bottom so I could trudge along the floor to find the wall, but I only kept sinking. Beneath me, there was only emptiness. There was no floor. I could see nothing, of course, but to me it felt infinite, like I was slowly falling down an endless void. The air in my lungs pushed against my ribs, desperate to be let out. Then something swam past me. I couldn't tell what it was. A giant ancient creature, a skeletal boy who now lived in the labyrinth. Or maybe it wasn't something separate and apart from the cave. Maybe it was a part of it, like a tendril or a pulsing vein. My lungs burned. I opened my mouth. The water rushed in. It flooded every part of me. I woke up choking. All at once, it felt so ridiculous. Of course it had been a dream. It had to be. Once I caught my breath again, I lay down, trying to calm myself. I watched the ceiling, and as I drifted off again, I could have sworn the pattern on the drywall began to swirl. It's been some time since the dream, though how long I can't really be sure. I've moved on from all of that. Even the town is only a memory to me now. I work in the city. I have lunch in the courtyard of one of those new big glass buildings. Every night when I go to sleep, I stare at my ceiling, and just before I fall asleep, sometimes it feels like the world isn't right. It's hard to explain what I mean, but sometimes as I'm going about my day, eating my lunch, sitting on the bus, watching the people on the other side of the window go about theirs, something feels off. The people around me are always pleasant and fine, but there's something not right about them. And sometimes when I'm alone, I wonder if I'm still there. Still in that cave. Just sinking into nothingness. I wonder if all this time I've been there. I've been sinking. What if I never truly woke up? What if right now I'm in the belly of some great beast that placates my mind while slowly but surely it devours me?
Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Patty was exhausted from a long list of job interviews she had to conduct today. She sat down relaxing, watching TV with a cup of coffee. She wondered was it a mistake having a cup of coffee, as it would more than likely keep her awake all night. She needed something to calm her nerves anyway, as her day was hectic, so she decided to enjoy her cup. Suddenly her cell phone rang. It was a private number, which she usually never answered, but something told her to answer the phone. When she did, she heard a familiar voice. "Hello, Patty," a woman said. Patty said, "Hello, who is this?" The woman said, "Patty, this is going to come as a shock to you, but you are in grave danger. Please don't say anything for a minute. I am your future self. You are in grave danger because I am speaking to you from the other side. I can't show you myself because if you see yourself dead, it will affect a lot of different things. You need to look in your attic right now. There is a ladder in the hall that you were using to paint the hall. Now what I need you to do to stay safe is climb that ladder, look to see is there a device like a bomb in your attic, and trust me, it will be there. It should be detonated in 5 minutes, but I'll tell you how to safely dispose of the bomb. Don't worry. Don't try to get out of your house, because the house is rigged. If you try to leave by window or door, it will activate the bomb. Please don't waste any more time. Do it now." Patty was in shock when the person hung up. She wondered, well, she knew it had to be some sort of prank. How could her future self be talking to her? But just in case there was something to it, because she did have an open mind, she got the ladder and put it under her attic. She climbed the ladder and put on the light and took a look around. She got a shock when she saw in front of her the person she refused an impersonation job for, a new show on the local TV channel. The person put a rope around her neck and said, "You bitch, you should have given me that job." Then as the rope was around Patty's neck, she was pushed down. She then hung from the rope while the woman placed a typed suicide note on the ground next to her body. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. Pat was really happy that he got to buy a beautiful new house for half the money that you could get anywhere else. It was just the type of house he loved and in an area that he dreamed of. Prior to finding the property, he spent hours on end looking at property sites and couldn't find anything that suited his budget. Pat used to work very hard in a factory for long hours, but for some reason he seemed to have hardly no money left when it came to paying bills. When he used to be working long hours, the only thing that kept him going was holding on to the hope of finding a property that suited him. He had a feeling one would come along. Then one day, while he was reading the newspaper, that opportunity arose. The next day he was speaking to the real estate agent outside the house. Everything he was telling him sounded perfect. Pat was feeling so lucky, he felt like he was dreaming. He couldn't believe it. There was actually even a swimming pool in the back of the house. He used to love on his downtime to relax by the pool. He hoped he would meet a nice lady and settle down with her and start a family. When Pat was in work, these days he felt a lot happier and much more energetic. He had finally secured the dream of having a property of his own, and one of his dreams. His workmates noticed the change in him. They even said it to him. They thought he met a new woman and asked him was that the reason. When he told them about his new property, they couldn't believe it. He could even sense jealousy from some of his workmates. One night, Pat was watching TV, and suddenly he smelt smoke. He went into the kitchen to see a huge fire. He quickly got his tablet that was nearby to document the damage to claim fire insurance. He hoped he wouldn't lose his dream house over some stupid fire. Suddenly a page from a newspaper fell in front of him. He picked it up and saw what looked like his house staring right up at him. He read, "Dream house goes on sale after 50 years after man claims the property is too haunted and dangerous to people live in. 3 people perished in a fire 4 times over the previous 10 years. The owner passed away this month, and with a lot of legal battles, the property finally goes on sale for a fraction of the price it is worth." Pat stopped reading, realizing he was in the middle of a fire. He got a start when he saw 3 people standing in front of him. They didn't seem to be one bit worried about the fire. He screamed at them to get their phone and call the firefighters. One man said to him, "Don't worry about the fire. You had to see that article to break you being dishonest with yourself. We were the same until we got a newspaper piece flying into our face. You are already dead, just like us, but now that you realize it, you can see us." Pat froze in the spot, realizing there was fire all around him, but he felt no pain. Then he looked over, behind the people, and saw himself lying dead on the ground, almost burnt to a crisp. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.